Okay, hello everyone. We are going to touch base on something different to what we've been looking at. We've been going through basic principles in the last few videos I've recorded. But now, well, I mean, it depends on time of upload. I suppose this might be the second video you watch of me. But I know I've recorded more than that. We're going to have our first conversation about comprehension. As I'm talking, please feel free to read through this page, make the notes you want on it. To comprehend something is, this is not just the title of what it is, it's a proper word. A comprehension of something is an understanding of something. It says it here. Comprehension means understanding. To comprehend means to understand. Which is why, when it comes to actually completing a comprehension, it is never about guesswork. You should never feel like you need to guess. You need to understand the text, because all of the answers are in the text. You shouldn't have to guess. You should be able to read and reread however many times are necessary until you find the answer in the text. It's not about guessing. You should be able to prove your point. This is it. With comprehension, you should be able, for every single answer, you should be able to prove what you're saying. You should be able to point to a part in the text and go, this is why I think this is the answer. Every single time, no excuse. If we just pick out a couple of things that are being spoken about here, well, you get the main point here. The title, first paragraph and last paragraph, tells you the main point of the passage. This is what it's actually talking about, what the argument is. Very often you get bits of writing that are to persuade you of something, and if you want to know what the writer's opinion is, remember, I think we have mentioned this before, or I've mentioned it in class before, I put it here, what the narrative voice, so I'm still capitalised, pardon me, what the narrative voice, this is the tone, the person, the voice you get from the bit of writing, right? The narrative voice. Are they angry? Are they happy? Are they trying to persuade you? Who are they? Very often they are trying to persuade you. And if you look at certain parts of the text, it's quite easy to see what that opinion is, or what the argument of the comprehension is. Traditionally, with any structure, you're going to have three parts: an intro, a middle bit, and then a conclusion. If you are looking for a conclusion, I would say the absolute first place to look at is the conclusion, the main point. If you're looking, I think I worded that poorly, if you're looking for your main point, your main argument, absolutely the main place to go is your conclusion. If you can't find it there, then start checking, the opening lines of your introduction and everything like this. But always, if you want to know what the argument is, what the main point is, zoom in, arrow, target that conclusion. It will help you understand what is being written. The introduction initially, well, not initially, mainly is your initial ideas, right? The reason why I would not say go to the introduction first to know what the main point is, because whilst that opening sentence or the introduction as a whole can indicate, can allude, imply, it can allude to what the comprehension as a whole is about, sometimes your introduction cannot be about the rest of the text. Sometimes its main purpose is for contrast. And so when you do get questions that talk about, when you take paragraphs 1 to 3, or when you take the introduction, what is its main purpose? What it's asking you for is, what does it do in regards to the rest of the comprehension? It's not asking you what do these paragraphs mean. It's asking you what does the intro do in regards to the whole comprehension. Let me change the shape of this, and let me put this just here. What does the intro do in regards to the whole comprehension? So be careful, because the purpose of an introduction sometimes can be for contrast, not to say what the main point is. footsteps. Mystery footsteps. What we keep coming back to is a phrase you will hear time and time again with comprehension. Active reading. You need to be taking in the information as you read. You shouldn't actually have to constantly reread to come back. Not only should you not have to guess, you shouldn't have to keep coming back over and over again, because that first time you read it, you need to be switched on. Reading is fun, it's enjoyable, sure, but this is a piece of work we're doing here. You get questions on it afterwards. You need to make sure you understand. That first read is you, in your mind, going, okay, that's the introduction there, that's what it's talking about, that's what that bit's talking about, so on and so forth, right? You need to digest the information sufficiently in that first reading, or you need to be able to get a mental image so that when you come to your answer, you go, oh, I recognise that word, I know where to look in the text, I remember that shows up there, or that shows up there, etc. Paragraphs, where does it, I think it's, yes, finding information, every paragraph is based on one topic. Your paragraphs are normally one major point each. And when I talk about building a mental image, knowing what each paragraph is about is very useful for helping you map the comprehension on that first read, so you can close your eyes afterwards and go, okay, if I've got a question about that bit, I know it's probably going to be in paragraph 2, because I remember paragraph 2 is about that. It speeds up the process for you, and it encourages you to be even more of an active reader. Now, when we, down here, we talk about eliminate, the phrase in question is a process of elimination. Now, very often you will get comprehension questions that have multiple possible answers, and your task is to, of course, figure out what the right one is. But it's not immediately obvious. It's not a kind of question where it's just, oh, I've seen those words in the text and all the others never show up, it has to be that one. It's more so, okay, well, let me go back. Well, it can't be that one because it says that. And then you cross it off. And you keep going until you've got only one option left. And then that one is likely to be the correct answer. These are just different ways of answering questions, different tips and tricks to make you more effective when it comes to comprehension. Your vocabulary here. Read the sentence before and after to answer vocabulary questions. When we talk about reading phrases, words, around a word you don't understand, we're asking you to understand the context. If there is a word that you've never seen before and you've got absolutely no idea what it means, a very good way of figuring out exactly what it means is by understanding the surrounding context. If you can compare it to other words in that text, or connect them to other words in that text, or think about what the sentences themselves are saying surrounding that mystery bit of vocab, then you're likely to be able to come up with a pretty good estimate of what the definition is. When you finish the comprehension, when you go home, when you have the chance to look up the word, build your own vocabulary bank. You don't necessarily have to write all of them down. I find it can be very useful to do it. But the more words you know before you sit in a comprehension, it's just logic, right? The more words you know before you sit down to complete a comprehension, the less likely you are to be caught up by a word you've never seen before, okay? Another way of helping you define words, this is something I try to teach in the classes quite a lot, is a use of similar sounds. Let me give you an example here. The word depict, bottom left of this screen. The word depict. Now, are there any sounds in that word that sound familiar? To me there are. The final four letters, P-I-C-T, sound like picture. So we know it's going to be something to do with pictures, something to do with images. And then if we use a surrounding context, the way it's used in the sentence, we might be able to figure out the actual meaning of depict, which is to represent something as an image. As I'm telling you this, if you didn't know what the word depict is, add it to your vocabulary bank, write it down. The more words you know, the less likely you are to be caught out. So, okay. Let's continue on to the next page, I think, yes. So, we're looking at different kinds of questions or different kinds of thinking you have to do in order to answer questions. Deduction. So, deduction, to deduce something, is to reach a logical conclusion based off of information we have at our disposal, information we find in the text. So, If I walk into a room and I slump down on a chair and I say to you, "Oh, I am knackered, I am so tired," and then you look at me and I'm in a football kit and my knees are a bit muddy and everything, you can deduce, you can make a logical deduction that I am tired because I've just put in a lot of effort in a football match. I've done a lot of running about, right? That is a deduction. A nonsensical and illogical deduction would be to see me in that football kit, hear me say, "Oh, I'm tired, my knees are all muddy," and then think, "Oh, he's tired because he's just baked a cake," or something. You see how that doesn't make any sense. Our brains don't work like that. You need to do this in comprehension as well. If you see something in a comprehension, you see some sentences together, you go, "Oh, that probably means this. That probably refers to this," right? Let's let's read an example to demonstrate what a deduction is. I'll give you one example, but there are multiple deductions included in the book here. So, it was a dark and stormy night. The wind was howling and the rain was pouring down in sheets. John was sitting in his living room reading a book. Suddenly he heard a loud noise. It sounded like something had crashed into his house. He got up and walked to the window. He looked outside, but he couldn't see anything. The rain was coming down too hard. John decided to investigate. He put on his raincoat and boots and went outside. He walked around the house looking for any signs of damage. That's when he saw it. A tree had fallen onto his roof. The branches were poking through the shingles. John knew he had to act fast. He ran back inside and called his insurance company. The insurance company told John that they would send someone out to assess the damage. In the meantime, John decided to take matters into his own hands. He went to his garage and got his ladder. He leaned it against the side of the house and climbed up to the roof. He looked at the damage. It was worse than he thought. The tree had caused a hole in the roof. Water was pouring into the attic. John knew he had to fix the problem before it got worse. He went back down the ladder and got his tools. He climbed back up to the roof and started to work. He hammered and sawed and nailed. He worked for hours until the sun started to come up. Finally, he was done. The roof was fixed. John was exhausted, but he felt good. He had saved his house from further damage. He went back inside and took a shower. He changed into clean clothes and went to bed. As he lay there, he listened to the rain tapping against the window. He smiled. He had won. So a text there about John encountering, in a storm, a tree crashing into his roof, causing a lot of damage, and a water leak into his attic. Now, a deduction uses actual evidence. It's not opinion-based, it's something you can say with conviction. It's not about what you think personally, right? It's about saying, "Oh no, this happened and I can prove it because it says this and this." I can add those things together and say, that's why they happened. A very good example. Look at all these deductions, they're all true. But listen, look at number 7 in particular. John got dirty wet while he was working outside, which is why he took a shower and changed into clean clothes. So here we go. We know it's raining. Remember that. That's one of the things it said earlier. It's raining, and the tree's fallen over. That's probably going to be a bit dirty, maybe a bit muddy as well. He's climbing up the roof. He's sweating because he's hammering and sawing and nailing. He's working really hard. He was exhausted, right? And it's raining. So those 2 things, he's 3 things. Exhausted, it's probably a bit dirty, maybe a bit dusty from all the work he's doing as well. And it's raining really heavily. He's going to be soaked through. He went back inside, took a shower, changed into clean clothes. We deduce he's doing that because he has gotten dirty and wet. Do you see how that works? Nowhere in the text does it say John was soaked through by the rain. Nowhere does it say John got really dirty by doing all the work. But we see why it makes sense to say, oh, well, he's taking a shower. Why is he taking a shower? Well, we know it's raining, so I can deduce he was soaked through, or I can deduce because he's working so hard, he's hammering and nailing, it got dusty and a bit dirty, so he wanted clean clothes. You see how that works? It's about making something definite out of the information we know. Good. Okay. An inference. Now, inference is different to deduction. It's similar, but it's different. An inference is something more opinion-based. This is not something as definite as a deduction. A deduction, you can probably say, oh, that for sure happened, no one would disagree with this. An inference, it has a lot of reason to it, and it's very logical, but it's more opinion-based, in the sense that, the example given there, a politician talking about, like he's going on a speech, and if he's really shouting, there's a chance that it may just be he's quite passionate, but you could infer that it's an issue he feels angry about, he's annoyed. But that would make sense, that's logical. You've used the information you've been given, and you've made a logical inference. Okay? So, let's look at the text again now that we know what an inference is. So, one really good example in this one, study all of these, but the one I want to talk to you about is this one in the top right. How does John feel when he heard the loud noise? Now, if you were home alone and you heard a really loud noise outside, you might panic. You might get really scared. You might walk really slowly and really worriedly over to it, or you might panic and go, someone's trying to get in here, and you might run to the issue to try and defend your home, or in a panic, Either way, there might be panic or fear. Now, because we know that that's probably the traditional reaction to something like this, we might think, if the question was asked, how does John feel when he heard the loud noise? He might go, oh, there's an option there saying panic, that makes sense. Wrong. This is an assumption. That's what we say about comprehension. You shouldn't ever have to guess. You should never make an assumption, no matter how obvious it seems to you, no matter how logical it seems to you. Use the text. Use the text. You can make an inference that he's panicked if it seems that he's panicked. What does he actually do? You might initially think that he's frightened or surprised. Well, he got up and walked to the window, right? This is the sentence. Yes, he got up and walked to the window. That, to me, sounds quite calm. Quite. Here's another word for calm for you, vocabulary bank. Quite still, quite placid. It's telling me that's not how you spell placid. How do you spell placid? I thought it was. We'll say that for now. I'll double check that for you. In the end of the video, I was certain it was two C's. Yes, he got up and walked to the window. People that are scared or people that are in a panic don't just walk. So I would say he was calm. You see how we use the text to make an inference. Because he's not running, because he's not panicking, because he's not flailing his arms about, we are inferring that he was calm about the noise. He kept calm. If we don't infer, if we don't use the text, we presume that he's panicking, and that would be wrong. We wouldn't get the mark. You see why assumptions are dangerous. They are dangerous. Right, and the most easy question of all. If we are being completely honest about these kinds of questions, literal questions, these are questions you should never get wrong. You should never get a question wrong. You haven't got an excuse. If you are an active reader, if you are properly focused, if you keep going back to the text when you need to check, to be able to point to it and go, this is where it says it, you should never get a literal question wrong. If you're doing a comprehension well, you should never get a literal question wrong. They ask you, a literal question, they ask you to just notice something in the text, right? So, for example, if the question was who travels by public transport in the passage, all you need to do is find the names. That's it. There's no extra thought than that. You're not deducing anything, you're not inferring, you don't need to think that much. You don't need to add up any clues, add up any hints, add up any numbers. All you need to do is find it in the text. Very often there will be a who question, a what question, a when, a where, a why, a how, right? You do not need to make an inference. You do not need to make a deduction. You just need to find something in the text. There are some examples there. Feel free to pause them. They are the most straightforward kinds of comprehension question. I'll tell you what, whilst we're there, I will double check how in UK English placid is spelled. I was certain it was a double C. Apparently it's not. Apparently it's one C. See, look, even I make mistakes, guys, but that's okay. Mistakes are how we learn. So, let's read this together and let's do the questions. This is the first comprehension we're doing. What I'm going to do is, as I'm going through this, I am going to underline any words that I think we should talk about. When you're doing this on your own, you should do this too, and then you should look up the words and build your own vocabulary bank. So, let me get my online pen here, and I'll underline any words that I come across that I think we need to define. So, this is from a book called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, very famous book. some years old now, centuries old even, but very famous book, very famous book. When Tom awoke in the morning, he wondered where he was. He sat up and rubbed his eyes and looked around. Then he comprehended. It was the cool grey dawn, and there was a delicious sense of repose and peace in the deep, pervading calm and silence of the woods. Not a leaf stirred, not a sound obtruded upon great nature's meditation. Beaded dewdrops stood upon the leaves and grasses. A white layer of ashes covered the fire, and a thin blue breath of smoke rose straight into the air. Joe and Huck still slept. Now far away in the woods a bird called, another answered. Presently the hammering of a woodpecker was heard. Gradually the cool dim grey of the morning whitened, and as gradually sounds multiplied and life maintained itself. The marvel of nature shaking off sleep and going to work unfolded itself to the musing. My apologies. Unfolded itself to the musing boy. A little green worm came crawling over a dewy leaf, lifting 2/3 of his body into the air from time to time and sniffing around, then proceeding again, for he was measuring, Tom said. And when the worm approached him of its own accord, he sat as still as a stone, with his hopes rising and falling by turns, as the creature still came toward him or seemed inclined to go elsewhere. And when at last it considered a painful moment with its curved body in the air, and then came decisively down upon Tom's leg and began a journey over him, his whole heart was glad, for that meant that he was going to have a new suit of clothes, without the shadow of a doubt, a gaudy, piratical uniform. Now a procession of ants appeared, from nowhere in particular, and went about their labours. One struggled manfully by with a dead spider 5 times as big as itself in its arms, and lugged it straight up a tree trunk. A brown-spotted ladybug climbed the dizzy height of a grass blade, and Tom bent down to it and said, "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Your house is on fire, your children's alone." And she took wing and went off to see about it, which did not surprise the boy, for he knew of old that this insect was credulous about conflagrations, and he had practised upon its simplicity more than once. A tumblebug came next, heaving sturdily. Did I put sturdily as a word we need to talk about? No, so we won't. Sturdily at his ball, and Tom touched the creature to see it shut its legs against its body and pretend to be dead. The birds were fairly rioting at this time. A catbird, the northern mocker, lit in a tree over Tom's head, and trilled out her imitations of her neighbours in a rapture of enjoyment. Then a shrill jay swept down, a flash of blue flame, and stopped on a twig almost within the boy's reach, cocked its head to one side, and eyed the strangers with a consuming curiosity. A grey squirrel and a big fellow of the fox kind came scurrying along, sitting up at intervals to inspect and chatter at the boys, for the wild things had probably never seen a human being before, and scarcely knew whether to be afraid or not. All nature was wide awake and stirring. Long lances of sunlight pierced down the dense foliage far and near, and a few butterflies came fluttering upon the scene. Let me underline this one for you, and let me underline this one for you. Tom stirred up the other pirates, and they all clattered away with a shout. In a minute or two were stripped and chasing after and tumbling over each other in the shallow, limpid water of the white sandbar. They felt no longing for the little village sleeping in the distance beyond the majestic waste of water. A vagrant current or a slight rise in the river had carried off their raft, but this only gratified them, since its going was something like burning the bridge between them and civilization. They came back to camp wonderfully refreshed, glad-hearted, and ravenous. And they soon had the campfire blazing up again. Huck found a spring of clear cold water close by, and the boy had made cups of broad oak or hickory leaves, and felt that water, sweetened with such a wildwood charm as that, would be a good enough substitute for coffee. While Joe was slicing bacon for breakfast, Tom and Huck asked him to hold on a minute. They stepped to a promising nook in the riverbank and threw in their lines. Almost immediately they had reward. Joe had not had time to get impatient before they were back again with some handsome bass, a couple of sunperch, and a small catfish, provisions enough for quite a family. They fried the fish with the bacon and were astonished, for no fish had ever seemed so delicious before. They didn't know that the quicker a freshwater fish is on the fire after he is caught, the better he is. And they reflect little upon what a source open-air sleeping, open-air exercise bathing, and a large ingredient of hunger make too. Okay, let's talk about the words here that I've underlined. So, repose, this one up here. Repose. A delicious sense of repose and peace. This is a great one where we can use context in. It's next to the words peace. And calm and silence are in the same sentence as well. Repose is a sort of calmness. Repose, tranquility, peace. Pervading, if something pervades, it is perceived above all else. It is felt the strongest. It is the overriding thing, the dominant thing. The calmness and silence are the dominant things in this setting at the moment. Something stirs. If it stirs, it makes a noise. It sort of moves about a bit. It's often used when something's sleeping. It stirs. Whilst it's still asleep, it sort of rustles a bit. It moves to a different position. It might, make a slight mouth noise. Obtrudive is obtrudive. Obtruded. To obtrude is to butt in on something. It's to become noticeable, but in an unwelcome manner. Do write these down as I'm telling you these. Go back, listen to my definitions, write down the words. I'll tell you one I haven't underlined. Don't know where yes, here we go. Manifested. For something to become manifest, to manifest is to show or demonstrate. Sounds multiplied, life shows itself. Becomes real, life becomes real. The marvel of nature, the wonder of nature, W-O-N-D-R, the wonder of nature, the wonder of nature. Musing, to muse on something is to think deeply about something. If something is gaudy, we've spoken about this in a class comprehension recently with some of you, it is vibrant and excessive, not necessarily in a pleasant way, quite an offensive way, too much. Credulous. For someone or something to be credulous, they are eager to believe something. They are easily convinced of something. They are ready to believe something without much thought. Conflagrations are large fires. A rapture is a great feeling of enthusiasm. So it's basically an equivalent of saying, trilled out her imitations of her neighbours in a very enthusiastic moment of enjoyment. Lances, this is another great one to use context. Long lances of sunlight pierce down through the dense foliage. Now, we can use our context of both these. We know they're in somewhere that's got, trees and plant life. Lances of sunlight, we've all seen it before. What does sunlight look like when it comes through something, comes through the clouds? It's beams, it's columns. So a lance must be a beam or a column. Foliage is greenery. Leaves, the leaves of trees are foliage. Limpid, I didn't underline limpid. Shallow and limpid water. Think about things that water could be. What might water be, especially in as exotic, as beautiful a place that this passage from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer is describing? Limpid, transparent, translucent, completely clear. A vagrant is an unsettled person that moves from location to location. Not necessarily homeless, they have homes, but they never settle. So a vagrant current is a random one, it comes from nowhere, it's not going anywhere in particular. The raft that these boys have travelled to this place in has just been taken away by a vagrant current, a current going in no direction in particular. A wandering, W-A-N-D-E-R-I-N-G, a wandering current. To be gratified is to be fulfilled, to be happy about something. That made me feel good, that's what I wanted. I'm gratified, I'm fulfilled. And then ravenous should be one that we might have heard before. Hungry. To be really hungry is to be ravenous. So, let's talk about the questions here, and let me talk about some logic that you might use for each one. We'll do this one together today. So, in the passage, where did Tom, Huck, and Joe wake up? Remember, those are the three boys we've got here. It says here, Tom, the other boys, Joe, and Huck. You see it there? Tom here, at the top of the introduction, the first paragraph rather. Joe and Huck in the last sentence. So, in the passage, where did Tom, Huck, and Joe wake up? On the beach. Well, there's definitely a body of water, but it doesn't sound like a beach to me. A shore near the woods. I wouldn't say near anything, it sounds like they're in something to me. A forest around the sea, or a sandbar. Well, you may look at these words and think, oh, hang on, I've seen one of them before. The white sandbar. In the shallow, limpid water of the white sandbar. A sandbar is something geographical. They are on a sandbar. So it must be that one. You see, this is a literal one. Where? You see that? We spoke about how literal comprehension questions are where, who, what, when, why, how. Where did Tom, Huck, and Joe wake up? Literal. A white sandbar. That's the first mention of it explicitly where they are. So, why was Tom confused when he woke up? Well, we know this is a great point to show how a lot of questions in the comprehension will tell us exactly where to look if we pay attention. Why was Tom confused when he woke up? We know we can ignore most of the text. All we need to do is look right at the beginning, because that's when Tom wakes up. When Tom awoke in the morning, he wondered where he was. Okay, so he's confused. Why is he confused? He sat up and rubbed his eyes and looked around. Then he comprehended. What is he trying to comprehend? He's looking at the things around him. He doesn't recognise it. So when we look at the answers, he believed he was amidst a dream. No, we know he's awake. Doesn't mention previous night. He had no recollection or ended up in his current location. Well, perhaps, but the further on you read, it mentions their raft drifting away. There it is, vagrant. A vagrant current or a slight rise in the river had carried off their raft. They did come here in full knowledge. They tried to get away from the little village in the distance. They did come here. So it's more so that he needed time to figure out what exactly was going on, to discern his surroundings, to figure out, to discern, to make out, as in to see. I make something out with my eyes. To make out visually. Third question. A white layer of ashes covered the fire and a thin blue breath of smoke rose straight into the air. What does this statement suggest? So, it implies that they had ignited a campfire the previous night. Now listen, suggest implies we are going to need to make a deduction here, perhaps, because it's going to be the actual answer. It's not going to be an opinion, but it's not literal either. We need to deduce something. So, while the ashes covered the fire, a thin blue breath of smoke rose straight into the air. Well, ashes covering the fire, that means it's out, and the smoke rising, so, you know, it's recently been put out, maybe, still a bit warm. Doesn't mention sand at all. Their boat definitely didn't catch fire. Remember, it mentioned it going out on the waves, so we know it's not that. A statement hints at the presence of fire in the woods. Well, it's right in front of them, so it's not in the woods. So let's make a deduction here. I think, to me, that suggests, because they've slept there, haven't they? He's woken up there, which means they must have been there the previous night. So I can deduce that they were there because they're waking up there. So perhaps they lit a campfire the previous night. This one, A, seems to me the most logical. So let's say A. Question 4. Why did it not surprise Tom to see the ladybug fly off after he said the rhyme? Now, this one is all about understanding vocabulary, but we've spoken about the two key words here now. Credulous and conflagrations. A large fire. Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Your house is on fire, your children's alone. She took wing, she leaves, and went off to see about it, the fire, which did not surprise the boy, Tom, for he knew of old that this insect was credulous, easily convinced of something, ready to believe anything about large fires, had practiced upon its simplicity. If something is simple, it's not a very clever thing. It's simplicity, easily tricked. Why did it not surprise Tom to see the ladybug fly off after he said the rhyme? Well, Tom thought the insect might be naive to think that there was a fire nearby. Naive, easily convinced. You see how understanding the vocabulary there unlocks that the answer is A. Naivety. Tom thinks that the insect is naive. The text uses the word credulous and simplicity. It has to be about naivety. 4 should be A. 5. As suggested by the passage, what are the three boys mentioned to be? What? Literal question. This is just about finding it. Tom stirred up the other pirates. There you go. I'm not going to take any more time on that because it's that easy. You just got to find it. B. Pirates. What insect did Tom touch? Literal question. Which one did he touch? Now, we've only just spoken about a ladybug, so you may go, oh, ladybug. Careful! Remember what we spoke about with comprehensions. Don't assume anything. Go back and check. He doesn't touch it. He gets down close and speaks to it. What other bugs are mentioned? A tumblebug comes out. Tom touched the creature. Look no further. 6 should be C. What made wild creatures uncertain about whether to fear humans or not? Well, let's go and have a look. We know where the wild creatures come and inspect the boys. So here we are. The birds are moving about, cocked his head to one side and eyed the strangers with a consuming curiosity. A grey squirrel, a fox kind. Inspect the chatter of the boys. The wild things had probably never seen a human being before, scarcely knew whether to be afraid or not. That doesn't mean afraid. It doesn't mean they don't know whether to be afraid. They're just inspecting. They're examining. So, when we come back down here and look at the question, they had never encountered humans before. Encountered. The word encountered, let's have a look here. Had probably never seen a human being before, never encountered. Those are synonyms. Those phrases use synonyms of each other. They're saying the same thing. This is a literal question. It's just tried to confuse you by not saying exactly what it is, by changing it slightly with a synonym. Has to be A. How did the blue jay react when it encountered strangers? Well, this is another literal question, and we know where to look because we've only just been there for question 8. Blue jay, how did it react? Swept down a flash of blue flame and stopped on a twig almost within the boy's reach, cocked his head to one side and eyed the strangers with a consuming curiosity. That's your sentence. It expressed curiosity. Well, it expressed curiosity. Eyed the strangers with a consuming curiosity. Literal question. Very often words will be repeated exactly in the text. It's often a very good sign of what you are looking for. Question 9. What happened to the boys' raft? So, what happened to the boys' raft? It had been wrecked by a storm. Remember, we've already spoken about this. What happened to the boys' raft? This comes down to understanding vocabulary again. Remember, it said a vagrant current, a wandering current, took the boat away. It had been carried away by the water. Should be B. What alternative did the boys discover as replacement for coffee? Word search. You need to find the key words. That's how you know you're looking for something. Coffee. I remember them mentioning coffee. Coffee. There you go. Coffee. So, read backwards. Good enough substitute. Had a wildwood charm, sweetened. Okay. Broad oak hickory leaves. Those are the cups. Found a spring of clear cold water. A spring of clear cold water. Spring water. B. Should be spring water. It should actually take you quicker than this. I'm going slowly to explain the answer to you to make sure you're getting what I'm saying. But when you've got this many literal questions, it should just be, oh, okay, coffee, bang, I see it, know my answer, because you found it in the text. So, phrases as they use in the passage. A shrill jay swept down, a flash of blue flame, and stopped on a twig. A flash of blue flame. So, can't be a simile, because there is no as or like. Personification, well, a flame isn't person-like, so it can't be that. An analogy is a story that has a meaning. This isn't a story. So if we process of elimination it, remember that, we know that metaphor's left. A shrill jay swept down, a flash of blue flame. That's a comparison. And as or like isn't used, and a comparison without as or like is a metaphor, so it has to be D. They stepped to a promising nook in the riverbank and threw in their lines. What is the word nook? So they stepped to a promising nook in the riverbank. Well, riverbank is there, and that's something geographical, right? So a promising nook in the riverbank, something. A nook is something in the riverbank. We see how the order of the sentence implies that. Something in the riverbank. Something, a thing, is always going to be a noun. It has to be D. About the meaning of words, well, we've already spoken about the meaning of words, so these should be easy. The opening passage, what does the word repose mean? It was next to the words like peace and silence. Rest or relaxation should be B. What does the word credulous mean? Well, we've already done a question on it. We've already spoken about the meaning of credulous. Easy to believe something. C. Naive. Those are your first tips. That is the first comprehension of the English book. Congratulations.